Hey there, YouTube friends. It's Ryan here from All Mine Ranch. And in today's video, I'm going to give you the whole backstory of how I became a 51-year-old dude living off-grid on 22 acres in the middle of the Arizona desert, how I came to this journey, why I decided to go this route, and really just share with you why I'm doing what I'm doing. So subscribe and enjoy. So let me give you a little background on me. I'm 50 years old, just about 2 weeks away from being 51. I'm in cybersecurity. I've been in IT most of my adult life, although I got out several times to do internet marketing, to do real estate, flipping houses, and things like that. But when that got rocky or challenging, I always tended to come back to IT, and now I'm in cybersecurity. So I do have a day job, but fortunately, because of COVID, it's not fortunate we have COVID, but because of COVID, my whole company went remote, and it's been 2 years now, and now I'm comfortable enough in my position, in the demand for my position, where I can say, you know what, I'm just not going back to an office building ever again. But just 2 years ago, I was living in Dallas in a tiny house, commuting every day to downtown Dallas, riding the elevator up into a high rise, and working with thousands of other people in a high rise for a corporation and doing cybersecurity. But now I get to sit here in my tiny house at my own desk, setting mostly my own schedule, or at least having the flexibility to get up and, do my thing, eat when I want, go run errands when I need to, as long as I'm getting my work done and I'm performing, right? I was married for 7 years. I do have a 17-year-old son in high school out in California. But for most of my adult life, I've done a fairly traditional route. I grew up in the suburbs, and then when I became an adult, I lived in apartments in cities, San Diego mostly. But I guess when I was younger and did the Navy thing, I moved around a lot. And the idea of relocating and setting up in a new place, the Navy forced me to do it a few times between San Diego and Hawaii and whatnot. Then I moved to Atlanta after I got out of the Navy. And then about every 3 or 4 years, I would change states, or at least it seemed that way. So I've lived all over the United States. So I'm not afraid to change things up, and I'm also not afraid to move alone. So fast forward a number of years, I'm living in Dallas. I built a tiny house, the one that I'm in, primarily for financial reasons, not because I'm, a tree-hugging hippie or anything like that, but because I had a situation with back taxes in the IRS where if I didn't get my living expenses way down, I wouldn't be able to pay off the IRS and get that monkey off my back. So I built a tiny house. It took me 2 years. It cost me about $20,000 in cash, but now I'm in it and I really like it. And I've been living in it now. I started in Idaho. I took the tiny house to Dallas, lived in it there for 5 years. And now just in the last 2 months, I've pulled it out here to southeast Arizona, where I'm living on 22 acres, completely off the grid, in a pretty remote location. I do have a few neighbors, and there is a town 10 minutes away, but when you look around, you see mountains and desert and scrub and not much else. It looks pretty remote, although it is not technically the middle of nowhere. I do have an internet connection, obviously, or I couldn't upload this YouTube video. But I did not plan on any of this. I was in Dallas, and I decided to build out a cargo trailer and convert it into a travel trailer, because since COVID hit and I was working remotely, I thought, you know what, let's go travel a little bit. Let's start hitting some of the national parks, Yellowstone and Grand Tetons and Big Bend out in West Texas. And let's go visit my son. I didn't want to pay, $150 a night for a hotel room for a week when visiting my son. And I thought, well, I built a tiny house. Why not convert a cargo trailer to a travel trailer and stay for free and travel all over? And at the same time I was thinking about that, I also got back into motorcycling. And I thought, well, I could put my motorcycle into the cargo trailer and explore the national parks on my motorcycle. And maybe I could do like YouTube it and video, film it all and, get my YouTube channel going for some side income, or maybe just to supplement my income. So I did that. It took me almost a year to build out the cargo trailer. I call her Margot. She is on this YouTube channel. The build videos, there's about 20 of them, are on this channel, so feel free to go check those out. And I started traveling, and I did a big tour of the West Coast. I hit a couple of national parks. I spent some time in New Mexico and in Southern California and in West Texas. And I visited my son for a little while. And I just so happened to stop in the town of Bisbee, Arizona, to visit some friends. And for grins, I thought it was a cool town, and I had seen their Facebook posts for a year or two showing pictures of Bisbee, and it looked like a really funky, cool, interesting, unusual, offbeat type of a town. And I really liked those types of town. It had kind of a hippie artist vibe, but it was the Old West and it had mining roots. Bisbee's just a really cool place. If you've never actually seen it, Google it and look at it on Google Maps so you know where I'm at. So I stopped in for a week just to hang out, with my cargo trailer and visit my friends. And for grins, I just hopped on Zillow and started looking around at what property values were, how much land was going for, if there were I just like to do that. Being, in the real estate business in the past, I like to know what's going on in markets when I'm traveling around to places. In fact, usually when I'm in a town, any small town, I stop into a convenience store and get one of those little magazines, that has the home listings in it, and just to see what houses go for in an area. So I did that essentially here, but via Zillow, and I found this 13-acre property that looked really interesting, that was built. It had the shell of a house that was made out of 2 containers, not shipping containers, but more like steel modular building, steel frame containers, 40 feet long, 9 feet wide. And the previous owners took 2 of those, put them about 12 feet apart, and then knocked out the interior walls and connected the 2 buildings, with floor joists, and they put in half of a floor, and they lofted a roof over top of the 2 containers and put in a really nice glass door. You'll see the photos, and you can explore my YouTube channel to see it. And I really liked the fact that it had amazing views. And I got to thinking, in fact, when I saw the listing on Zillow, I stayed up. I probably saw the listing at 8 p.m. at night. I probably sat there just looking at the photographs till 3 o'clock in the morning, not even knowing if the property was still available. And I started to mentally rehearse what it would be like to live on 13 acres in the desert, inside of Mexico, with, in this weird situation. And it had cisterns for rainwater, so there's no sewer connection. They had put in a brand new septic system that was certified and ready to go, and that's a big challenge and expense, and they had already done that. The building itself was interesting and cool. There's no plumbing, electrical, or any of that, but it had the walls and the roof and some really nice glass doors that opened up to an amazing view, 360-degree views in general. And the property had 2 really large cisterns that were capable of holding about 5,200 gallons of water. And there's also a 3rd container, which could be the starting point for a garage and workshop, which, after living in my tiny house for 5 years, having no garage for storage of tools, and I have a lot of tools and woodworking gear, a table saw, a router table, band saws, things like that, a garage and a workshop was really high on my priority list. Now, this property doesn't have it, but it has a good starting point for that. So I looked at it on Zillow, and I stayed up till about 3 o'clock in the morning just mentally rehearsing what it would be like to live in the desert and not having a lot of social life, not having people all around, not being traffic noise, horns, sirens, all that stuff that I was used to in Dallas. And I thought, you know what, at this stage of my life, I think that would work for me. Now, there's power poles right on the road next to the house here, right next to this property. And originally I thought I would just run a power drop from Arizona Power to the house to make life easy, and then maybe eventually down the line let go of that power connection and just be off-grid and do solar. I had gotten familiar with solar by putting solar on the roof of my cargo trailer, which is what made that a mobile workstation that allowed me to work and travel on the road. So I knew a little bit about solar panels and solar energy from that project. Well, trying to make this as short as possible, but once I started looking into it and doing some research and getting on Facebook and talking to people who lived off grid, they said, Ryan, once you connect to power to like a utility company in most states, you cannot ever disconnect. They got their hooks into you and you're going to get a power bill for life, even if you're not using any power. And I started to think about that. And I started to think about my desire to eventually retire. Since I'm 50 now and I've been working since I joined the Navy at 18, at some point, I don't want to work till I'm 70, or at least not doing what I'm doing now, 40 to 45 hours a week working for the man in a high stress job. I like my job, but it's very high stress and it is very mentally challenging and taxing. And at the end of the day, I'm usually pretty sapped or zapped psychologically. So I don't want to do that forever. And I thought, well, if I'm going to get socked with a power bill every month, whether I'm using any power or not, and they can monitor my energy usage and all that, I just don't want that. So I thought, you know what, screw it. I had actually called Arizona Power and got, they would have paid for the power connection and everything. I would have had to pay for a little bit of trenching work, but other than that, it was free. But I said, you know what? I don't care. I would rather invest $5,000 or $10,000 or even $20,000 in solar panels, inverters, batteries, and all that, and live off the grid and not have any utility bills whatsoever, so that in retirement, if my land is paid off and the house is paid off and my truck is paid for, all I have to cover is groceries, cell phone, an internet connection, gasoline, insurance, the basics like that. And since I don't have massive savings to rely on in retirement, getting living expenses down became a really high priority. So when I factored in the beauty of this location, the fact that the previous owners had already put in the rain catchment system and a septic system and started a house for me, and I do have building skills, so I can finish out the house. It's a lot of work and expense, but I can do it. If I can pay cash for the building materials let me back up. I looked at the listing and I thought I can do this, but it wasn't until I called up the previous owners, Brian and Laura, who were a very adventurous young couple who had, just their plans changed, their life changed, and they ended up letting this property go. But when I talked to them, they were willing to do seller financing. And so with a reasonable down payment, they were willing to carry a note on the property, I think for 7 or 10 years. I don't even remember. But the payments are low enough and the interest rate's low enough that I think I can pay it off in 5 years. So when I factored in this idea of having a paid-for, nice house with amazing views, without dealing with the BS of people all around, which I was getting sick of, and being able to start a retirement scenario that required very little money every month to afford that retired or semi-retired lifestyle, it just all came together and made sense. It just so happened about a month or two after acquiring this property that another parcel directly across the dirt road came available, and those owners, they wanted a little bit much for the property, but it was not unreasonable. And they were also willing to do seller financing. So I did that too. So I acquired another 9 acres right after I had acquired my 13 acres. So now I have 22 acres that are divided by a little dirt road. And I primarily did that just so no one else could build close to me or obstruct my view or make noise or disturb my peace. And I should be able to pay off that parcel as well in about the same 5-year time frame. Now, I admit it's challenging to both pay off both of those debts and attempt to put money in a 401k and buy the tools and building materials necessary to build out this property. It's a real balancing act, and I'm having to, live by a budget, but I think it's all worth it. So that's how I ended up here. So that's sort of part of what I wanted to share. Just give you the backstory on how I ended up in a tiny house, living on 22 acres in the middle of, the Arizona desert near Bisbee, within sight of Mexico, and YouTubing the journey. Now, there is a whole mindset thing that goes along with this about self-reliance, preparedness, what my beliefs are around the economy and the future of the United States dollar and the debt-based economic system we have that's run by the Federal Reserve and central banks like the European Central Bank. I won't go into it in this video. In fact, the very next video, I think I'm going to talk more about it. But I'll sum that up by saying I do have very serious concerns about the viability of our economic system and the viability of the dollar and all fiat currencies remaining legitimate and viable. I think our economic system actually is going to completely collapse and have to be rebuilt from the ground up. And I do think Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies that are outside of the control of central banks are going to play a big role in that. So I do have a tad bit of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And I do think being in cybersecurity, there are some other threats beyond just the economic. I think we're going to undergo a major cybersecurity attack at some point that will probably bring down the grid, at least for a couple of days, if not for a couple of weeks. So I've really gotten into this idea of being prepared and having food on hand. So the idea of making my own power out here with solar panels, and it's almost always sunny in Arizona. I mean, it can go for a week or two where it's kind of overcast, but even on overcast days I can make power. So the idea of generating my own power, relying on rain and cisterns for water catchment was really appealing, because if we do have some kind of event, whether it's war, pestilence, famine, supply chain disruption, an economic collapse and a major depression, civil unrest. I mean, preppers have a long list of reasons of why they are preppers. And I don't quite call myself a prepper yet, or if I am a prepper, I'm not very good at it, but I'm pretty darn close to being a prepper. I'm at least into having skills that I can rely on for building things, having the tools to build things, having some lumber on hand, having extra food, extra water, backup power systems. Like, I'm really into resiliency and having redundancy in my home and in my scenario, so that if the shit does hit the fan, I'm not a sitting duck, or at least not right away. Now, if any calamity carries on for months on end, yeah, we're all screwed and it's going to be chaos. You know, we could have people going door to door basically stealing food if they don't have their own. And since most people are not prepared whatsoever, they couldn't survive 3 days without food or water. They couldn't survive 3 days if the ATMs are down. They have no gold or silver for bartering. They have no food stores. I mean, the average American really is screwed in a big way if we have any of the events that preppers tend to prepare for. I don't want to be in that bucket. I don't want to be that guy who's dependent on other people. So all of this has come together to make me want to be highly self-reliant. I like building stuff, and I just don't want to be a burden on anybody else. So now here I am, almost 51 years of age, living in a tiny house, building a real house, being completely off the grid, self-reliant, liking the solitude, and that's my journey. That's my story. You know, my son is almost 18. He's about to graduate high school. He's going to be out on his own. So, you know, it's okay to live a little bit distant from him. And eventually he's going to inherit all this. So the idea of having something that I can build and spend years building on. Oh, and I haven't even gotten into the whole learning about how to put the water, the rainwater, into the ground to grow trees, to grow fruits and vegetables, and being self-reliant from a food growing perspective. I expect to green up this property and have it be really nice eventually. You know, it's going to take a lot of earthworks, but I've been studying all the books and all the videos on permaculture and how to green up the desert to make it something abundant and food productive. So I plan on doing all that. And my son eventually, hopefully he appreciates it, but he'll eventually inherit this land and the abundance that comes with it. Because my family, my parents, my grandparents, no one ever built any wealth. I inherited nothing. You know, when my dad passed about 7 years ago, I think it's been, he had just enough to cover the cost of his cremation and really nothing else. I got a couple pieces of furniture you know, from him. But that was about it. And my mom is not in a position, bless your heart, Mom, love you to death. But, you know, she's done a good job with having life insurance, and that might help me out a little bit when she eventually passes. But there's just not wealth handed down generationally for me. I've been working since I was 14, working hard, have a good work ethic. And I would like to leave something for my son, and it's not going to be massive amounts of cash, especially if, you know, fiat currency collapses. Maybe if we all convert to a Bitcoin standard, maybe I'll die with some Bitcoin that he can inherit. But that's it. I just wanted to leave a legacy of some sort, and I think building up 22 acres into an abundant, self-reliant homestead is absolutely the best thing that I could do as a father for my son, to leave a legacy and to show him how to live outside the box. You know, not everybody is cut out to live in a 2-story house in the suburbs with 2.5 kids, married, you know, commuting every day. That's not a lifestyle for everyone. There are millions, if not billions, of people on the planet who have alternative lifestyles, whether they're tiny housers or living in a yurt or backpacking around the world for years on end or living out of a camper van or an RV. There's lots of alternative lifestyles, and I'm trying to be an example for my son to show him that you don't have to follow the crowd. You can march to the beat of your own drum, do things a little bit differently, even if it sometimes invites jokes and ridicule. I've certainly got enough ribbing from coworkers about being a tiny houser, and a lot of people look at my prepping and Bitcoin ownership as ridiculous folly. But that's all right. I'm able to withstand that criticism and do my own thing, and I hope my son learns to do his own thing. Not that there's anything wrong with living in the cities or the suburbs, but I want him to make it a conscious decision, and I'd like to be a role model to let him know that he can make his own decisions in that regard, and that there's nothing wrong with working hard physically to build structures, to build houses, to build power systems, to make yourself self-reliant and resilient. So I think I'll stop there. I'd love to hear your comments, your concerns, and your questions. If you're considering becoming an off-gridder or a homesteader and doing permaculture and raising your own animals and growing your own food, I would really like to hear your thoughts and your questions. What are the things that are maybe holding you back from doing that? Because if I can share my experience about my challenges and show you what I'm doing here on this property, maybe it will inspire you to have the confidence that you can do it too. And I really like helping people in that regard by showing them how to build a lifestyle, how to challenge themselves, how to, again, march to the beat of a different drummer. So this has been my off-grid homesteading journey. It's probably going to be for the rest of my life. I've probably got 10,000 more YouTube videos up my sleeve. So I'm just going to keep going, keep filming, keep sharing, keep answering your questions. And if I can be of service in that way, awesome. And if I can retire in my own little desert paradise comfortably on a small income or a modest income, then great, more power to me, right? And I hope everybody can get themselves in the position where they don't have to become a Walmart greeter if they don't want to at 75 years of age just to put food on the table, because that is not my idea of an ideal retirement. Probably not your version of an ideal retirement. So that's how I came to be an off-gridder. So leave your questions, leave your comments, and in the very next video, I'm going to start getting into more of that whole prepping, resiliency mindset, and some of the things that I think could befall the United States and all developed nations economically. And I'm going to share some of the things I think you ought to do to prepare yourself just a little bit for those eventualities. So thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.